The Nintendo Entertainment System hit North American stores in 1985, but it was available only in New York and New Jersey. It wouldn't hit stores nationwide until the summer of 1986. During the system's test markets, there were 17 titles available, 2 of which came packaged with the system. They were all swell games, but Nintendo of America figured gamers wanted more for the nationwide rollout. To that end, more Famicom titles soon made their way to North America. One of those games was Mach Rider. Now, before we dive into the game, I would like to address something that's been debated for quite some time, the game's North American release date. Nintendo claims the game was released alongside the NES on October of 1985, a month before the Japanese release date, but sometimes even their listings can be wrong. Some newspaper ads about the NES from October to December of 1985 don't list Mach Rider as an available game. Edward Semrad of the Milwaukee Journal states in an October 5, 1985 article that Mach Rider was to arrive in 1986. And the September 1986 issue of Computer Entertainer magazine lists Mach Rider as having been released in August of that year. Seeing as this publication had been documenting the NES since its initial North American test launch, I can't think of a more reliable source. I mean, yes, the title screen in the back of the box claimed that the copyright year was 1985, but that was the year the game was originally developed and copyrighted. And let's not forget that Pac-Man for the Atari 2600 had a copyright year of 1981, but it didn't come out until March of 1982. Let's face it, back in the 80s and 90s, video game distribution wasn't nearly as heavily documented as it is today. Now, with that out the window, let's move on to Mach Rider itself. Mach Rider was developed by Nintendo's R&D 1 team and HAL Laboratory. The game was programmed by Hiroaki Suga, and the composer was Hideki Kanazashi. Both of them had previously worked on F1 Race, Nintendo's answer to Namco's pole position. The game never saw a release outside of Japan. However, there had been rumors of a planned versus arcade system version called Nintendo 500, but that never came out either. Back to Mach Rider. The game's origins could be traced back to 1972, when Nintendo released a Mach Rider toy based on Hasbro's Yellowtail Funny Car. One could send this toy race car zooming across the ground with a launch pad. However, outside of the name, there's no known connection between the toy and the video game. And unfortunately, I can't seem to find any concrete details about the game's true origins. Released on November 11, 1985 in Japan as Mach Rider is a futuristic, post-apocalyptic vehicular combat game where you play as Mach Rider in the year 2112, taking on an army of evil riders driving quad runners while finding survivors. At the title screen, you get to choose from one of 4 options. The primary sequence is the fighting course. Each sector has a choice of 2 routes. You use the A or B button to determine which one. You use left and right on the D-pad to steer Mach Rider's motorcycle, and up and down to change gears. Use the A button to accelerate, and the B button to fire. To beat the enemy riders, you have to fire upon them or bump them into an obstacle. But don't use up too much ammunition too quickly. If you do, unless you lose a life or advance to the next sector, you'll only be avoiding obstacles for the rest of the course. Finish the course, and depending on the enemies and obstacles you destroy, you score. To avoid quad runners coming from behind you is quite the chore. Take a hit from behind at mismatched speed, and you lose a life. Other obstacles include oil drums, oil slicks, rocks, puddles, etc. The endurance course is similar to the fighting course, except you have unlimited lives. However, to advance to the next level, you have a certain amount of time within which to meet or exceed a specified distance. Crashing into things will only take up serious time, but if you're careful enough, you'll pull through. This is my preferred course in Mach Rider. It's much easier than the fighting course, and there's not as much trial and error here. The solo course is similar to the endurance course, but this time there's no enemy riders. Definitely not as frustrating as the fighting course, but it can get pretty boring without enemy riders. Design is pretty complex. Obviously, you design your own course. But like with the other NES games in the programmable series, you can't save your courses in the NES version. The save and load features only work with the Japan-exclusive Famicom data recorder. Plus, unlike Wreckin' Crew and Excitebike, this game never got re-released on the Famicom disk system. Shame, isn't it? Now, no matter what course you choose, the way Mach Rider explodes is pretty much similar to the way Samus Aran does so in Metroid. And speaking of Metroid similarities, in the Arcade Versus System version of the game, after completing 10 courses, it looks as though Mach Rider is revealed to be a woman in a race queen-like swimsuit carrying a dagger. Watch out, Samus! Mach Rider is one step ahead of you! I think this can all be attributed to the fact that R&D 1 had a hand in making both of these games. Going further into Mach Rider's gender, the Japanese magazine High Score Media Work had an officially licensed poster featuring a woman posing in a rider suit with M Rider emblazoned on her belt buckle and a dagger in her sheath, the very same one she was holding in Versus Mach Rider. The poster also had the Mach Rider title and a motorbike in the background. Whether or not Mach Rider really is a woman is debatable. Tell me what you think in the comments. All in all, this game is amazing. The fighting course may be a big challenge, and the solo course may be a bit boring, but it's fun once you get the hang of things. Plus, when it came out in North America in 1986, it was edgy and serious, unlike most first-party black box titles. True, there is violence in some of these other games, but goofy-looking enemies, graphics, and mechanics would tend to mitigate that violence. Mach Rider, set in a post-apocalyptic environment with violent enemy riders, doesn't fall under that category. It's a shame we never saw another Mach Rider game. The game was really cool. I mean, sure, we saw a few similar games, but there's just something about Mach Rider that makes you want more. There have been a few references in the Super Smash Bros. Series though. In fact, series creator Masahiro Sakurai had jokingly considered Mach Rider to be a playable character since Melee, claiming he liked the character's name. Today, Mach Rider still isn't a playable character for Smash. To this day, the arcade version of the game still hasn't seen a release on consoles. As for the NES game, a loose copy is pretty common and inexpensive these days. You can also get this on the Wii U and 3DS Virtual Console while they're still available. But don't you think this game deserves some attention on the Nintendo Switch? Let me know in the comments. Thanks again for watching Gaming Delight. Until next time, happy gaming!